thank you. I want to say thank you for the role you play in our community and the role of the Winchester Rescue Mission, raising awareness like this, both here locally, but obviously I think you're going to get a national footprint with this telecast. And the reason why I wanted to reach out and come by as the superintendent of schools here in Winchester is just to highlight some of the issues that we face in the schools. And homelessness is not singular, and it's not many times I think people have a perception that homelessness is some of the folks you see maybe on the side of the road.
Right.
Certainly that's not what we see in schools.
Yeah, I love this. I love, because I think there's a lot of things we should talk about that most people don't know.
Yeah.
I would love to talk about the McKinney-Vento law. So again, I don't know where we start.
Sure.
But, for the last 24 hours, I've talked about what homelessness looks like based on what we deal with, right?
Sure.
So, a lot of mental illness, substance use, and that being our primary issues that we deal with.
Right.
And then layered on top of that with where, the current economy is, So now we have that storm coming up against what was already a disaster.
Well, we can certainly start there, and just today, in preparation, I pulled some of our statistics. I'll start maybe with throwing out some numbers.
Yeah.
Prior to the pandemic, we had reached a peak in 2019 of 225 students that were involved with what we call McKinney-Vento, and I'll explain that to our folks here in a minute. But essentially, that's 5% of our population. Think about that. So 5% of our students, children, experience homelessness at some point during the school year last year. And then when you dig down a little deeper, you say, well, who is that? And I will tell you, it respects no age or demographic, quite frankly. So
or even education sometimes.
And it really crosses the gamut from 4 and 5 year olds to 18-year-olds in high school. And so that's kind of where we were prior to the pandemic. With the moratorium on eviction during the pandemic, we saw a decline in that, about 150 through the pandemic. But what's most concerning, and you hinted at it, is right now today, first quarter, we've been in school for 1 quarter only. We're up to 107 students right now. And I talked with our McKinney-Vento specialist today, and she said, Jason, folks are just on the edge. Like they're about to, leave that hotel, leave that 1-bedroom apartment that they're renting, and the economy is certainly having an impact, and people are experiencing that. And then, the eviction rates have gone through the roof, as you would expect. If there was a moratorium during the pandemic, now people are getting evicted. They're not able to pay their rent, and then some of the housing situations here in our city in particular, folks who own property know they can put a little investment in and flip that property and get paid a lot more. They're not willing to have that lower rent that some of our folks need. So that just is a springboard for us to talk a little bit there.
Right, yeah. So we have a person who's just moved to the area to work with us here, and you know what, man, he's had one heck of a time finding a house, and this is a guy who's been sea level most of his life, and brilliant, educated, top notch, never been homeless, and the struggle to find housing is overwhelming. So imagine, if somebody at that level is having an issue, if you had a family who was, as United Way was here earlier, termed Alice, right? So right on the edge, what in the world are they going to do?
Well, and what's interesting, it's almost counterintuitive, but on one hand, housing prices are through the roof.
Right.
Housing values are through the roof. If you own a home, that's great. If you're looking for a home, not so much. And then rents are up.
Right.
And
big
so
time.
that's one story. And yet at the same side, we published on Monday, our free and reduced lunch rate is at 77%, highest it's ever been. Up almost 20% over the last 7 years.
Oh, wow.
So obviously we have a lot of families in Winchester that are below the poverty line. They qualify for free lunch. They're receiving SNAP benefits. They're involved with social services in some way. And you wonder how those two can coexist. But then, again, digging into some of the stories, I heard one today of a mom that we worked with this week. And she would not describe herself as homeless, but when we dug into her story, she did qualify under the McKinney-Vento to receive some services. Why? because she was renting one room with 3 children. Wow. That's not stable housing.
No, not at all.
That is not the environment we want our kids to thrive in. And she's doing the best she can. But that's just one story of someone who may not even fit the description classically of, quote, living on the street.
Right.
But it's not the type of housing that brings dignity to a family.
Exactly right.
Brings dignity to those kids and that mom. And she's working. She's doing everything
giving
she's
all
supposed
she's
to do.
got.
Right. Yeah. So.
Man, so again, one of the things that we're facing here is just the number of men and women we have that are ready to move out.
Okay.
Like they have,
sure.
Money in the bank and a stable job, but we can't find housing for them.
Right.
So now we can't help the folks who are knocking on the door daily because we don't have, the bed space for them, because the folks that are ready to move out can't move out because there's nowhere for them to go.
Yeah. No, it's challenging, and we do the best we can, obviously, and support, but ultimately then that vicious cycle takes hold of, sometimes, they're paying day to day, month to month.
Right.
And it's not cheap even, but because there's no financial stability, they can't better themselves or get into a long-term lease or even, obviously buy a home.
Right.
It's not even in the cards.
So let's talk about the So I had 3 goals with this event.
Sure.
One being education, 2 innovation. And what's been so cool about this is getting to talk to our new Chief Behan, and different folks in the city. Talk with folks who are both on city council, running for city council, and it's given this opportunity for a lot of free flow of information, and even an opportunity to innovate and just think of some cool things to do. And then the third thing was to raise money. So I want to go back to the education piece, because we've talked about a few things that you and I know, but maybe somebody who doesn't do this stuff day to day doesn't know some of this information. So I think it'd be good for us to first of all talk about the difference in definition when it comes to homelessness. So we would operate under a HUD definition. You would operate under what the Department of Education, and then the McKinney-Vento as well.
Yeah, so absolutely. Yeah, and that's where I think there is some stark differences in the education world. In the public school world, we do operate under a federal statute called McKinney-Vento that has a definition of homelessness, and it is broad, so it doesn't mean you're literally living in a tent on the street somewhere, but it includes what we call couch surfing. It includes moving from hotel to hotel to hotel. It includes what we call doubling up, right, where you're doubled up with a family member or a friend. So it's a little broader, but essentially, if you were just boil it down, it's like if you're unstable in your housing situation, it's not predictable. It could change at any moment. It could change in a month. Then we classify that as homeless. We do get a small, and I mean a small amount of money to serve some of those families from the federal government. But one of the requirements is, and we pick up this tab locally with local tax dollars, we have to, it's an unfunded mandate, so to speak, is if a homeless child moves out of our district, so let's say they moved in with a family member in Frederick County, Warren County, West Virginia, wherever that is, we are required by law to maintain the continuity of their education. So we have a fleet of vans that go all over a 100-mile radius from the city of Winchester to pick up children to keep their education continuous, so they don't have to change schools all the time. Because for many of those kids, it's going to be temporary. They hope to come back. There's still a tie to Winchester. And we partner with other school divisions. We'll even meet, a school division halfway and transfer kids. It's quite an elaborate process.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Last year, the furthest we had away was Northern Virginia, I think in Herndon. We had a student living in Herndon for a little while. But then we call that district, they transport part of the way. And the hope is that's temporary, right?
Sure.
They're going to find stability. Once they find stability, enroll where you live. But that's something that we do every single day. Yeah, we have a fleet of van drivers.
Get out of here. Wow. I mean, and again, so that's tough for a lot of things to happen, because you're trying to get that child the best opportunity possible, right? So they don't end up in that situation when they're adults, right?
Absolutely.
The education piece is so important.
Yeah.
And then we would operate kind of under the HUD definition, which basically somebody's classified as homeless if they're somewhere that's not meant for human habitation.
Okay.
So, if they're outside or in a condemned building or something like that. So, that's a whole lot more difficult to define, and that's why.
Yeah.
So when you might hear a discrepancy in numbers of, I might say one number, or you might hear a total number, it's because we're working with different definitions.
Sure.
But a lot of times those, it's the same kind of issues that are leading to it, whether it's a same definition or not.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for us, again, we're watching. I did talk to Chief Behan a little bit. One of the things she brought up was, some of the struggles they're having with mental illness, not just in adults, right? Like, and again, I could probably spend a couple hours talking on that because we've done that for the past 24 hours. But she highlighted some of the struggles that they've had with children with mental illness, and
no,
so,
that's a huge problem. I think I hesitate to put everything in the mental health basket.
I agree.
I think those of us who are in the world of working with kids, working with families, etc., sometimes it's an easy way out to just say, well, that's mental health, and having a wife who works in the business, she's always cautious, saying, well, that might not be mental health. It might be. Doesn't mean it's not important, but it might not fall in that bucket. But we are seeing young children in particular. Through COVID, I think, the isolation, certainly poverty adds to that, instability in their homes, unable to socialize with their peers, not really understand how to navigate, 400 kids in a building, getting on a bus, and especially those youngsters, 4 and 5 years old, they're coming from situations where they haven't had to interact with their peers, they haven't had to, quote, share their toys, and they're struggling. They're really struggling. I think we're also seeing the tip of the iceberg on babies who are born with addicted parents, specifically opioids. And I don't think there's a ton of research on what that's going to do long term to these children. But certainly many of them have that situation in their past.
just sat through a training on fetal alcohol syndrome, and what the long term effects for adults is, and man, was so eye-opening for me. I could only imagine the wave of what's coming in regards to the overdoses and things that we're seeing. So we know a wave is coming. That is that's a bit scary.
So you've got maybe a child is born to a mother who's addicted. In addition, the access to some of the technology and what visually kids see that they shouldn't see. On the internet. I do believe think of that brain, right? It's 0 years old through, let's say, 10. That brain is soaking up everything they see and hear, every experience, and it's creating pathways in that brain that the longer those pathways travel, the more what we call, they become highways in the brain.
Right.
And they become almost cemented the older we get.
Sure.
And so some of our kids have seen things that you and I haven't seen.
Right.
Both physically in the home, outside the home, in their neighborhood, but also on that screen because they're not being monitored appropriately. The technology is being used as a babysitting tool, and then they get into all kinds of stuff that I think rewires their brain and creates what's acceptable in their mind that society is saying that ain't right, And so then they come to school and are asked to code switch and enter a whole different norm.
Yeah. Man, that's so powerful. So that leads me to want to talk about the next thing, because I think one of the other unintended consequences of all of this chaos is first of all, maybe I back up and say this. One of the things that is so vital and important is the work that the Winchester Public Schools does, right?
Sure.
I mean, it is paramount to our future.
Yeah.
So we have that, but one of the things that I fear is an unintended consequence of all of the chaos that has been the last several years is the attack on the public school system. Right. Because with that, you're eroding, maybe for some, the only stable thing they have in their life.
Right. That's exactly right. And now we're going to have to go another hour because you just hit on a hot topic. But it is disheartening, and I'll tell you, we feel it, and feelings matter.
Sure.
So when I talk, I did my teacher advisory council last week, and then I walk the halls all the time. It demoralizes teachers, administrators, superintendents when there's an attack on the work that we do every day with students.
Yeah.
And we, of course, we want to be, the idea of accountability is always a topic in the policy world, and certainly we don't shirk away from that.
Sure.
But, like the article that was published this week, there's more to some stories, right? And so, you can't compare apples to oranges.
Right.
And when you compare Winchester Public Schools and you dig into our demographics, which the key ones are 77% free lunch, 25% of my students speak English as a second language. When you take those demographics and find other school divisions around this state that are similar, guess what? We do very well.
Yeah.
We do very well. Now you compare Winchester to Loudoun County, those test scores are not going to be the same, and I don't apologize for that,
right?
Because that's not appropriate to compare those apples to apples for the very things we're talking about, including homelessness. Like, kids surfing on couches, they're quite frankly not doing their math homework.
And I think, man, this is such an important part of the conversation, especially for just the average person listening and the keyboard warrior.
Yeah,
one of the most important things about doing this event is that there's keyboard warriors on the other side waiting to just tear into anything we're saying, and I mean, they have the freedom to do that, and that's okay. But here's what I fear long term: laying out all of the things that we have shared over the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
And the number of, and part of it might be because I'm at the end of 24 hours here, so I'm exhausted, right? But just when you feel the exhaustion, we had different executive directors here. We had different, all sorts of different services in our community represented over the last 24 hours, and you just sense this just pure exhaustion.
Right.
Because we've been asked to solve some of the most difficult struggles, right? The police chief sat here, and I've worked closely with the Winchester Police Department in many occasions where they are being asked to be mental health professionals rather than police officers, right? And I think you can take that and lay that over what folks that are working in Winchester Public Schools are doing, from the teachers to administrators. You got into this to educate, and instead you're parenting, and you're helping with the mental health, and you're, all the different things that's not what you signed up for, but because of your passion and because of your love for the students, you gladly jump into that. But how sustainable is this if we continue to undermine all of the foundation of the individuals who are giving so much of themselves to meet head-on things that we were not educated or planned to do with our lives?
No, absolutely. I mean, you think of a typical student going in to be a teacher, right? Which we have far fewer of them today than we ever have. It's not a profession people are signing up for. But when you did that, when I did that, I loved math. So I wanted to be a math teacher, and I love kids, and I love coaching. Like I enjoyed that atmosphere. But I wanted to teach math. I wanted kids to come in. I teach them algebra 2. I coach some basketball. And now, to your point, that same teacher has to navigate a lot of other things in that classroom, and it's increasingly more challenging. And then the expectations are up here, and then the assessment from the public or policymakers or the politicians sometimes is, well, you failed. You did a bad job. You only 60% of your kids are
And they also resourced
proficient.
you down here.
Right. Yeah. So it's a challenge. I say this all the time. We don't have failing schools. I don't care anywhere. There might be a couple schools that you say, oh, that's not very good, but in general, public schools across America are rocking it. They are rocking it. We have failing communities, we have failing families, we have failing economics, we have a lot of failing things, but it's not the schools. And so when we judge schools, we're really judging the outcomes of the community. We're just a mirror of Winchester.
Wow.
That's all we are. And so, I'd put my teachers up against any group of teachers in America, and they'll get great results. So it's
wow, that's a powerful statement, man. That's great. So maybe a word of encouragement, just from what I've heard in so many of the conversations, not just this one, but the responsibility, own the responsibility as a community member to just support those that are, not doing this for the fame, the fortune, because it's not there, right? That are doing this because the real life impact that it has. And man, I want teachers that that are so passionate about this, teaching my kids.
Absolutely.
My kids are in public school, not in the city, but in the county, but I want the teachers getting up tomorrow morning, ready to face the day and love my kids first and foremost, and then the teaching stuff happens.
Absolutely.
The last thing I want is them to be attacked and undermined to the point that tomorrow morning they're waking up going, I wonder if I heard back from that job that I applied for to go work for UPS. Right?
Yeah, and that teacher shortage is real, and like I said earlier, colleges in Virginia and across the country, it's one of the least desirable majors in college. So our pipeline is just drying up precipitously, and I do think it's in part because of the narrative. It's the narrative of education. It's never good enough. Teachers get demonized sometimes as being lazy. They got a 10-month job, those types of things, and I just say come for a walk with me.
I can't say the word because it's late.
There
you go, sorry. Whew, man. That we've allowed politics to jump into this thing where there's this like finger pointing. That's like, man, where did that come from? Insane. So somebody's probably watching, going, "What does this have to do with homelessness?" Well, everything, absolutely everything. Yeah. Because if we don't get this stuff right, we're already, again, we've talked about the flood of what's here and what's coming. It does not get better if we don't start right here with the education system, making sure that it's what it needs to be. We're just preparing the next generation to not be ready to create stable community, and if that doesn't happen, this doesn't get better anytime soon. We already know it's going to be bad for a while, but we're just going to prolong how long this stays bad.
Now I would kind of deviate a little bit, not deviate from what you said, but take another topic of what stabilizes a community is what we call social cohesion. And so in my business, we call it social cohesion. And there's a ton of research around where that tipping point is, where a school community becomes saturated with poverty factors that it becomes harder and harder to overcome those things in the building. And that saturation point is 47%. I mean, if you were to do the research. So it makes sense, 50-50. Well, we're at 77%.
That's what,
And so it's just harder and harder for our teachers and schools to respond when it's that many students that have so many needs. And then I always tell people the best thing for a kid who lives in poverty is for them to go to school with a kid who doesn't live in poverty and sit right next to that child for 13 years of their life. But when we demonize Winchester Public Schools or any other public school system, then middle class, upper class families, what do? They want the best for their kid. And so if that's what they hear, then they are going to choose to self-segregate, essentially.
Thank you,
And I tell, just to brag a little bit, we send kids to Ivy League. We sent kids to Yale, Princeton, and Stanford last year. You can go to Hanley to Harvard. And so we can provide everything that any family would want for their child. And we desperately need that social capital to come into our schools and our city to buoy the ship, So we've got to have, yes, we need affordable housing, but we need strong middle-class housing. We need strong housing for families that have that classic 2-3 kids, want to raise their family in the city, because it's going to be much cheaper and much more available just across the line in Frederick County.
You're right.
And so
that's why I went there. And I'm feeling bad. I'm like, I'm put my house up for sale. Into the
come on. I hear that story is ubiquitous. That story is ubiquitous.
Let's put this in context for me. So one of the arguments and the fights that I get from people is they are just appalled that I would go down to Valley Avenue and put the mission down there, right?
Right.
We're going to keep this for women, but our men's shelter is going to move down to Valley Avenue, and everybody's like, well, all the services are downtown.
Okay.
Everything to serve, those that are homeless is downtown. Why would you move from downtown? And what that's, people saying is, we don't want them over there. But I would subscribe to the exact same thing, which is if I only surround the folks that I get to serve with folks exactly like them, so everywhere they go is people in the same situation with the same struggles, then it almost just reassures them that this is just what life is, and there's no hope outside of this.
Absolutely.
And I love them to be surrounded by people. You know, one of my favorite things when I was pastoring was I love looking out at the congregation that I got to serve in, and I saw doctors, and I saw teachers, and I saw guys from the rescue mission. And unless you knew who was who, you didn't know who was who. And they communicated and conversed and uplifted each other.
And that same thing
what
happens
that does
for kids.
is awesome.
Yeah, they foster aspiration, right? And so if I never see it, if I never see what it's like to have dinner around a dinner table, right, then I don't know what stability looks like.
Yeah.
When I don't hear that student A went home and did their homework last night and came to school prepared, I never see that, then I don't know that that's even possible or what you're supposed to do. And so we learn from each other. So learning is social, and so that's why that social cohesion is so important. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, man. You know, people are people. It doesn't matter what age they are, right? People are people.
Absolutely.
And I think the bottom line of all this is we just got to do a better job of loving each other. I think if we could just boil it down to anything, it's that. Like, let's just...
That's in the Bible somewhere.
Right? You know, how about that? You know? As a pastor, I would say, it's there. And that would change everything. So I just encourage you watching, man, let's do a better job of being there for each other and loving each other. Because we're all up against the wall right now. And it's tough.
Well, thank you, Brandon. Appreciate what you're doing.
Jason, thank you,
tired
sir.
as anything, so
I am.
I hope you sleep for a long, long time.
Well, I hope I said something worth saying, because it's tough, man.
Very good.
All right.